If this palace move really lands the way people think it does, then this is not just another royal paperwork story. This is not just about a title. It is not even just about Camilla. What makes this feel so explosive is that when a king changes the language around rank, role, and privilege, he is not only adjusting protocol, he is revealing what he wants the monarchy to look like after him, who truly stands at the center of it, and who may have reached the limit of their place inside it. And that is why this has people so stunned, because on the surface, it sounds like a formal royal order, but underneath, it sounds like a line being drawn. And before we get into the deeper meaning of all this, if you love these royal deep dives where we go beyond the headline and really get into what the palace language is actually telling us, make sure you subscribe and stay with me, because this one is not as simple as it looks. Because here is the thing. In royal life, titles are never just titles. They are signals. They are shields. They are permission slips. They tell the public who belongs, how far that belonging goes, and what kind of respect is expected around that person. So when you hear the claim that Charles has signed an order that effectively ends Camilla's royal privileges and strips away the queen consort framing that once defined her place, the real shock is not only the wording. The real shock is what that wording appears to admit, that her position may always have had a ceiling. That proximity to the crown is not the same as permanence inside it, and that in the monarchy, even after years of loyalty, survival, and public rehabilitation, bloodline still speaks louder than marriage. That is what makes this land so hard, because Camilla was never just any royal spouse. She was the woman whose existence once sat at the center of one of the most painful and public royal collapses in modern history. For years, she represented controversy, resentment, and emotional disruption in the minds of many people. Then, slowly, carefully, strategically, the palace worked to reshape her image. Not overnight, not easily, but steadily. She became the dependable companion, the quieter presence, the woman beside Charles rather than the scandal in front of him. Over time, the institution asked the public to stop seeing her as a source of fracture and start seeing her as part of stability. And to be fair, that effort worked more than many people thought it would. Camilla did the unglamorous work. She stopped trying to win the room all at once. She let time do what spin alone never could. She took on causes, kept her head down, and leaned into the role of practical royal rather than dazzling star. In a family where image can become a trap, that actually helped her. She stopped looking like a rival to memory and started looking like a functioning part of the machine. But even then, the word consort mattered. That word was doing a lot of work. It acknowledged proximity while setting a boundary. It said yes, she is queen in title through marriage, but not queen in origin, not queen by blood, not queen in the mythic way royal history tends to reserve for those born into succession itself. Queen consort was not an insult. It was not small, but it was precise. It explained her role while quietly protecting the institution from the idea that she and the bloodline were exactly the same thing. That precision matters now more than ever. Because if Charles has truly altered her standing in a way that pulls back privileges or strips symbolic language attached to her role, then what we may be watching is not a personal rejection alone. It may be a monarch preparing the institution for transition, tightening the shape of the crown around direct inheritance, and making it unmistakably clear that the future belongs to the line through William, not through marriage, not through sentiment, not through late-life companionship, through the heir. And once you look at it that way, the whole thing stops feeling random, because Charles has spent much of his reign talking, directly or indirectly, about a slimmer monarchy, a smaller working core, fewer dependents, less excess, more focus, more efficiency. That language always sounds modern, sensible, even necessary. But inside royal families, slimmed down almost always means something emotional too. It means somebody becomes central and somebody else becomes optional. Somebody is protected and somebody is politely edged outward. And if that is the atmosphere now, Camilla may be discovering the difference between being crucial to Charles personally and being indispensable to the crown institutionally. That difference is brutal. Especially because for Charles, Camilla has not been a decorative presence. She has been the person widely seen as his emotional anchor. Through years of pressure, ridicule, grief, adaptation, and public responsibility, she was the one who stood beside him when much of the country still had doubts. She was not the fairy tale bride, she was the realist, the survivor, the steadying force when the public mood was uncertain, and the monarchy itself had to absorb old wounds without admitting how deep they still were. So if this order is being read as a reduction of her standing, it creates a painful question. Is Charles making a harsh institutional choice even when it affects the person who has been most loyal to him in private? Because if that is what is happening, then this is bigger than image management. This is monarchy logic at its coldest. Duty over companionship. Inheritance over intimacy. Structure over sentiment. And that is exactly why people are so fascinated by it. Because the royal family has always sold two things at once. It sells family feeling, and it sells hierarchy. It wants to look warm enough to be loved and rigid enough to survive. Most of the time, those two things do not sit comfortably together. You can feel the strain in moments exactly like this. If Camilla is being repositioned, even subtly, then the public gets a rare glimpse of the machine beneath the velvet. You see who counts because they are loved, and who counts because the Constitution says they must. And let's be honest, that has always been the tension around Camilla's place. She earned acceptance, but she never erased history. She gained status, but her status was always interpreted through an emotional lens. Some saw devotion, others saw ambition, some saw endurance, others saw the final winner of a very old and bitter battle. That meant her position inside the monarchy was never going to feel neutral. Every shift around her carried more meaning than it would around almost anyone else. That is why even symbolic changes can feel seismic, because people do not just hear a title adjustment. They hear memory moving. They hear old pain resurfacing. They hear the palace deciding, in coded language, whose legacy it wants to carry forward and whose role it wants to contain. And no matter how polite the wording may be, containment is what this starts to look like. Now here is where it gets even more revealing. If you strip away the drama for a second and look at the strategic picture, a move like this would make sense in one very specific way. It would help clear the path for the next era. William and Catherine represent the direct future of the crown in a way no one else can. They are the symbolic reset. They are younger, more publicly marketable, more closely tied to the bloodline continuity that monarchy depends on. And whether anyone says it aloud or not, the institution knows where public investment naturally settles. It settles on the heir's spouse, and the children who embody the next chapter. That means everyone else, however senior they may look in one reign, becomes vulnerable to shrinking importance in the next. Camilla may have been central to Charles's emotional world, but William's future monarchy was never going to be built around her. That is the uncomfortable truth. She belongs to Charles's story. She does not naturally belong to the mythology of succession that comes after him. And if Charles is now formalizing that distinction in some way, then he may be doing what monarchs often do when time starts pressing harder, making sure no ambiguity survives him. Because ambiguity is dangerous in royal life. Leave too much undefined, and every future role becomes a fight. Every ceremonial appearance becomes a ranking debate. Every privilege becomes a grievance waiting to happen. The palace hates that. It prefers cold clarity to warm confusion. So if there has been an order, if language has been tightened, if privileges have been curtailed, it may be less about punishing Camilla and more about preventing future dispute over what she is meant to be once Charles is no longer the living center of the institution. And if that sounds clinical, that is because monarchy often is. This family is wrapped in emotion, but governed by permanence. People marry in, they work hard, they sacrifice, they adapt, but the crown still operates by an old rule that never fully disappears. Some people are attached to the story, and some people are the story. Camilla, however high she rose, may have just encountered that distinction in its most unforgiving form. And think about the emotional sting of that. Imagine spending years helping stabilize a man who spent his whole life waiting for the throne. Imagine weathering public hostility, mockery, and endless comparisons. Imagine finally entering the reign itself, only to discover that your highest legitimacy may have been temporary by design. That is where this stops being a constitutional issue and starts feeling deeply human. Because what would hurt is not just losing privileges. What would hurt is the message behind it. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your loyalty. But there are limits to where you can remain once the institution begins protecting its next shape. That would sting anyone. And in this family, almost nothing stays private once the symbolism becomes visible. People start reading everything differently. Past appearances look different. Previous statements feel loaded. Small choices suddenly seem like breadcrumbs. Was Camilla always being carefully elevated only for the length of Charles's active centrality? Were certain words chosen years ago precisely to allow this eventual narrowing? Was the palace planning for a future in which her dignity would be preserved publicly, but her actual influence would be significantly reduced? That is the kind of question this situation opens. Because royal power is rarely just about law. It is about atmosphere. It is about where deference flows. Who gets briefed? Who gets seen? Who gets consulted? Who still has rooms, staff, schedules, authority, and public framing? You can leave someone with honor and still quietly drain the importance out of their role. In monarchy, that is often how real demotions happen. Not with a dramatic expulsion, with a careful cooling, a narrowing, a subtle but unmistakable shift from central figure to adjacent figure. And if that is what people are sensing here, no wonder the reaction has been so intense. Because Camilla's whole royal journey has depended on one emotional argument, that however messy the past was, her place beside Charles became real, earned, and lasting. So when anything appears to weaken that lasting part, people instantly feel the contradiction. Was she embraced, or merely tolerated until succession optics demanded something cleaner? Was she integrated, or was she always conditionally accepted so long as the king himself remained the reason for her prominence? That is the deeper wound beneath the headline. And notice how this also exposes one of the monarchy's oldest contradictions. It asks women marrying into the institution to embody loyalty, support, restraint, and service. It wants them to stabilize the men at the center. It wants them to humanize the crown. It wants them to carry difficult public burdens without complaint. But when questions of inheritance, legitimacy, and future structure arise, the institution can suddenly become brutally selective about who truly counts. Not because effort did not matter, but because bloodline matters more. That is not modern, that is ancient monarchy speaking through modern packaging. And that is why the fallout from something like this can never be neatly contained. Even people who were never warm toward Camilla can look at a move like this and recognize its chill. Because once the institution shows how easily rank can be reframed when strategic priorities change, it reminds everyone that royal belonging is more conditional than it looks. Here is where William's shadow quietly enters the story too. Not because he would need to say anything directly. He would not. He rarely has to. But the future architecture of the monarchy is already forming around him whether the cameras spell it out or not. His household, his image, his family unit, his children, his eventual reign, all of that creates gravitational pull, and next to that pull, every other figure gets remeasured. Some remain important, some become ceremonial, some become historical footnotes attached to someone else's reign. Camilla's challenge has always been that she is a major figure without being a future figure. That distinction is everything. She can be respected. She can be thanked. She can be treated with dignity. But the monarchy's long game is not built through her line, her symbolism, or her independent place after Charles. It is built through William, Catherine, and George. That is the truth the institution may now be quietly aligning itself around. And if so, then Charles may not be humiliating Camilla so much as acknowledging, in the coldest possible royal language, the limits of what her role can become from here. Still, even if that is the strategic explanation, it does not erase the emotional cost. Because public life inside this family runs on appearances, but private pain is still private pain. Even the most disciplined royal cannot avoid feeling the difference between being indispensable and being transitional. And if Camilla is now being nudged from one category into the other, then behind the palace calm there may be a very different emotional temperature. Hurt, pride, acceptance, resentment, maybe all of it at once. That is where this gets really interesting. Because Charles himself has spent a lifetime balancing personal desire against institutional pressure. He knows better than almost anyone what it feels like to want one thing and be told the crown requires another. That history makes this moment especially striking. If he is indeed the one signing off on a narrowing of Camilla's standing, then he is doing to his own private world what the institution once did to him. He is choosing what survives over what soothes. That may be kingly. It may also be heartbreaking. And viewers pick up on that tension instinctively. That is why stories like this spread so fast. They are never just about protocol. They are about the oldest royal question of all. When the family and the crown want different things, which one wins? Most of the time, we already know the answer. The crown wins. Slowly, politely, almost invisibly. But it wins. And that may be exactly what this moment is showing us again, not through shouting, not through scandal in the obvious sense, but through language, through a palace order, through the quiet removal of assumptions people had started treating as permanent. That is how the monarchy often reveals its real priorities, not in chaos, but in correction. So if this change is real, and if it does amount to the end of certain privileges and the stripping back of the queen consort identity that helped frame Camilla's place, then the bigger story is not that Charles turned on her overnight. The bigger story is that the monarchy may be tightening itself around the direct line before the next transition becomes unavoidable. It may be preparing the public to see Camilla with respect, but not with lasting constitutional weight. Close to the story, yes. Equal to its future, no. And once that message is sent, you cannot really unsend it. Because the public starts looking ahead. They start imagining what happens next, how roles change, who remains visible, who fades, and what kind of monarchy is being built in the silence between official announcements. That silence is often where the real story lives. So maybe the headline shock is only the beginning. Maybe what really matters is that this moment, if true, exposes the monarchy's hierarchy in a way that is unusually clear. Loyalty matters, service matters, image repair matters. But inheritance still outranks all of it. And in the end, the institution protects the future it can pass down, not the relationship that helped the current reign survive. That is a hard truth. It is also a very royal one. And it leaves us with a bigger question than whether Camilla loses a title or a privilege on paper. It leaves us asking whether this is the palace quietly redrawing the emotional map of the monarchy itself, showing us where affection ends and structure begins. Showing us who was central for a season and who remains central for the long haul. Showing us, maybe more clearly than ever, that being beside the throne is not the same thing as belonging to what comes after it. That is why this feels bigger than one order. That is why people are reacting so strongly. And that is why, even if the palace says very little, the symbolism may already have said enough. But I want to know what you think, because this is one of those royal moments where the official wording only tells half the story. Do you see this as Charles making a necessary decision for the future of the crown, or does it feel like a cold and deeply personal narrowing of Camilla's place after everything she has done to stand beside him? Let me know in the comments, because with this family, the quiet shifts are usually the ones that matter most.